the Requiem Metal Podcast, episode 84, Diano Era Maiden. We just heard Running Free, and I am Running Free, and this is the Requiem Metal Podcast. I'm Mark.
And I am Jason, and we are looking at the Diano years of Iron Maiden.
Yes. Iron Maiden's one of those bands that everybody, I would imagine, that listens to this podcast, or everybody in general, like my parents know who Iron Maiden are.
Sure.
But to try to find a way to approach, I guess, these guys that isn't completely redundant.
Yeah, and I mean, you know, they've become sort of a cultural touchstone, I guess, of the heavy metal genre. And I mean, I know, like, my students are totally aware of Iron Maiden, you know, because of Guitar Hero. And I think just because of the generational influences that they've had, you know.
Just their touring I mean, they're like a live band. That's the way to see Iron Maiden. They've been doing it for, since like 1979.
And I mean, I almost see them in a weird sort of sense now that there's sort of become, in the last, I think, 10 years, almost an accessibility to sort of like the older style of heavy metal. You know? I mean, I think starting with like Black Sabbath reunions and things like that there's almost a tameness now to Iron Maiden. You know, they've been declawed in a sense, the same way that I think Rolling Stones kind of got declawed in like the late 80s, 90s, and then just sort of became like this band that defines kind of the baby boom generation or something. And I think Iron Maiden, in the same sense, will define kind of like the Gen X as we like approach our 30s and 40s. I mean, I could see, people that never would have listened to Iron Maiden in the 80s being excited about going to like these big spectacle concerts now that Iron Maiden is putting on.
Especially since Brave New World came out and Dickinson got reunited with the band, and I mean that's kind of, I think people always kind of see that as like that's the quintessential Maiden lineup. Everything from on Number of the Beast.
Yeah,
that's like the quintessential record. But I think a lot of people, and I was actually, when I was getting back into Maiden in the early '90s, like the Di'Anno stuff is what really kind of grabbed me, because it was raw, but it was technical, and it was like it was the genesis of everything that I come to know after that.
And I mean, my first Iron Maiden record was Number of the Beast Used, that I got at the record store that Mark and I eventually ended up working at, and I think I got that sophomore year in high school. But then the next thing I found used, it was Killers, and so I kind of grew up with that sort of appreciation of Di'Anno through I guess the high school years a little bit, and then near the end of high school, the Best and the Beast kind of compilation came out.
The 2-disc box set thing, yeah.
And the songs that I sort of globbed onto a lot, I mean, other than some of the obvious Dickinson choices, were of course like Phantom of the Opera and Iron Maiden, because there was like a primitive kind of cool kind of aspect to them, much the same way like a couple weeks ago when we were doing like Celtic Frost, the way that some of those songs from Morbid Tales kind of have like a cool primitiveness to them that's pretty sweet, and I think there's a charm to the Di'Anno stuff in that it wasn't perfect, it wasn't larger than life yet. It was a little rough around
the edges. It was a little bit more. They're a little bit more dangerous. I think they had that kind of vibe. I mean, especially and just visually, how like Di'Anno looked like he was pulled right out of like a British punk band.
Oh, sure.
The short-haired dude with like no shirt on, leather pants and spikes, and then everybody else was decked out in these goofy like spandex outfits and stuff too. It was like an interesting
And I think it's weird, a song like, you mentioned the punk thing, and the song we just sort of listened to was almost like, the same sort of like teen rebellion kind of angst that was going on throughout England.
It almost even has 70s, like a weird Alice Cooper vibe to it as well.
Oh, for sure.
It's just like anthemic.
Well, and it was funny, I was just watching some of these documentaries I was telling Mark about. Sometimes when I'm bored, like on a Saturday afternoon or whatever, even grading papers and stuff, I tend to watch VH1 Classic, and they seem to always rerun like all these different documentaries on music history and stuff, and they had the punk one on yesterday, and Johnny Rotten, something crazy's going on. Johnny Rotten was talking about how one of the first songs to sort of grab him and pull him into like the kind of rebellion form of thinking was I'm 18 from Alice Cooper, and he heard it playing in like a clothing store, a music store or something like that. And so it's interesting you mentioning Cooper, because in a sense, what was going on in England in the late 70s was this sort of, the economy was in upheaval, and England was just sort of in a state of chaos in a way, especially like London, and same with New York in the late 70s as well. And that's why like Ramones were doing what they did in New York, and then the Clash and Sex Pistols were doing their thing. But at the same time, not everyone vibed on punk, but yet they were still very disconnected as like a youth movement, and so I think bands like maybe Judas Priest, who are a little obviously ahead of Maiden, but like this whole new wave of British heavy metal that Maiden and Angel Witch and some of these bands are going to ride in on, I think was a different form of sort of teenage rebellion, than what punk was offering. It was obviously coming out of more the, I guess, Thin Lizzy, kind of.
One is more of, I mean, I don't think you can ever look at an Iron Maiden song that's like some kind of like social revolt song.
Yeah.
It's all way more just kind of like, get lost in the music, not some kind of like, social change kind of vehicle at all.
Yeah. And so Running Free is, he's talking about hanging out at the disco hall and, different things like that. And I was actually telling Mark about this weird phenomena that I saw in one of the documentaries, and Mark hadn't heard of this before, and something that was happening at the dance halls, the disco halls and stuff, where sometimes live bands would play, but other times it would just be like a jukebox or whatever, is they would have these like cardboard air guitar contests that were going on in the late 70s, and I don't know, Iron Maiden was sort of wrapped into that in a weird way, because those people were like metalheads that had no like outlet for anything, and then I think this whole new wave of British heavy metal kind of became the outlet. It was like people, like a lost tribe searching for like leadership, and all of a sudden like Maiden and Diamond Head like were their like leaders, because I think when Judas Priest, got the ball rolling, and I think got people thinking about this new sort of twin lead melodies, this different style of metal than what, say, Sabbath or Purple had offered in the early 70s. And Maiden, I think, seized that sort of zeitgeist of the era, these kids didn't want like stripped down punk, but they didn't mind the stripped down rawness that Maiden was offering, because there was a youthful energy to it like punk had, but it had more dynamics to it, more musicianship, and it still had that sort of metal attitude that Judas Priest was starting to like create with like the clothing and the metal studs,
leather and spikes
all that kind of stuff, you know.
And here, Steve Harris was pulling in a lot of, you know, wishbone ash, and, you know, you're mentioning like some Camel sounding stuff, a lot of the prog stuff without it being sounding like Rush.
Sure.
Like it still had an edge. That's kind of the big thing, I think.
Yeah, and you know, you mix the sort of Judas Priest, you know, hell-bent for leather kind of stripped down attitude with the musicianship of Wishbone Ash and Camel and things like that.
The twin leads,
you get, you know, this early Iron Maiden kind of sound, you know. So, you know, we sort of have joked about how do you approach a band like Iron Maiden. It's kind of like, you know, how do you approach Metallica, and that's why we've sort of avoided doing those particular bands, because it's like everybody knows them. So
like how Priest was. I mean, I don't think Priest, I mean, they're definitely, you know, kind of credited as one of the I guess the originators of the whole, you know, heavy metal sound from the 70s, but they're lesser known, I think, in the States.
Yeah, except for like 4 songs, you know, like the same 4 songs that always get in rotation.
But I mean, the way their kind of career started out was where, I mean, it's almost like classic rock, and then we get to the more like, I guess what we think of is the kind of the quintessential heavy metal sound. And then we get all the slow down, you know, more biker rock, AC/DC-ish stuff.
Sure.
But Maiden, their trajectory never really wavered until we hit the Blaze Bayley era, and then that's purely on a vocal level they wavered. But as far as like they've never like had a commercial record. They've never had radio play.
No,
they've basically garnered their reputation just by touring their asses off for years and years and years.
I mean, I think they kind of formulated in a way the model that like Metallica would follow in the 80s.
Yeah.
I mean, Metallica never did a video until One in '88, but by then they had such a mass cult following. You know?
And basically no radio play either.
And I mean, I know that Maiden got some airplay, you know, with like Number of the Beast and The Trooper and a couple other songs here and there, but it wasn't in mainstream, you know. It was on like Headbangers Ball and things like that, you know.
Or it was like niche radio shows. It wasn't like, you know, top 40 kind of stuff.
Yeah, and I mean, they released singles, but they were just, you know.
I mean, they did well, and like Prowler went in at number 1.
Oh, really?
Yeah, in the UK. Yeah.
Okay.
So they were huge in the UK, but as far as like they didn't really, until they started touring, you know, Europe and the States is when they exploded.
Well, the American market was such a bizarre market in the late 70s, early 80s. You know, you had the sort of disco thing that was kind of going on. And I think only bands that were making just the most like huge records possible, like what AC/DC Back in Black, or, you know, Ozzy Osbourne Blizzard of Oz in 1980.
Yeah.
Those are the only kind of like harder records that were even going to like penetrate the market. But, you know, as legend goes, most people know this already, but, you know, it really wasn't until Quiet Riot in '83 that the whole like American market kind of got cracked for the first time by like a legitimate, I guess, legitimate metal band.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, Randy Rhoads started out in Quiet Riot, so that gives him some legitimacy, I guess. But, you know what I mean? So the American market was hard, and I think you're right, until Maiden kind of toured the world a few times and sort of started to make this live reputation. And I think, you know, not to talk about Dickinson, but I think when he gets involved, he's able to take them to that next level, especially with the tours and the live
when him
settings.
and Nico McBrain kind of like that. That's kind of like that. That's the quintessential lineup right there.
Sure. And getting back to the debut record where we're at, you know, I mean, I guess Steve Harris is the main guy. The bass player wrote almost all the songs lyrically and musically.
Yeah, Dion did a little bit of lyrics on the first record, but all these songs that we're hearing now they were knocked around for 5 or 6 years previously in all these different incarnations. I mean, at this point, we think of this as, or a lot of people, or at least maybe this was just me, before I did a lot of, you know, like research in Maiden like over the years, but I thought that was like, okay, that's probably the first lineup, was the first record. And there was like, I mean, you look at the Best of the Beast box sets
in the band before this.
They had like 4 or 5 drummers, like 4 vocalists. I mean, guitar players, they went through like crazy. So basically, like Steve Harris was the only like fixture throughout that entire thing up until this point where we've got, I think it was in 78. Was it 78? 77, 78 that Diano and Murray and everybody came back in. And
Murray's the guitar player, and then the other guitar player who's only on this record is
Dennis Stratton.
Yeah.
And he's just he was with them for a little while, but he was always leery about he wanted to go more in like a traditional rock, blues rock direction.
Which is sort of what was big at the time. I mean, you know, outside of Judas Priest, no one else was doing anything remotely like this, and it was fairly dangerous. I mean, Black Sabbath was really kind of dying, in the late 70s, when they fired Ozzy and they really had no future.
They put out some good Dio records, but still at the time.
Well, Heaven and Hell doesn't come out till 80. But what I'm saying is, like, when Maiden is trying to, like, get their sound together, it didn't really look like...
Well, and they were playing, I mean, the people should really go seek out, it's called Iron Maiden, the early days documentary, and actually I think there's a part 2 of it. What the hell was that on? Live After Death. They just put a DVD out a couple years ago, and that's got the part 2 of it. But the early days, I mean, they've even got, like, you look at Steve Harris has his old journals. Like, okay, we played the cart and horse, we got $5. But he had this work ethic to where, I mean, he was a really good entrepreneur where he was like, okay, all this money goes back into the stage show. Like, he'd buy like bubble machines and smoke machines. Harris is the one that designed the logo, which is probably one of the best band logos ever.
Well, heck, we used it for our cross country t-shirts. I mean, it's such a sweet iconic logo.
But yeah, they were slowly kind of amping up the theatricality, and the big show they did in, God, where the hell was that? I think it was in Germany, was with Kiss. They really kind of like blew them up in Europe.
Because they probably gave Kiss a run for their money in terms of stage shows.
Well, Kiss actually, they would flip-flop headlining. Because
Kiss would actually allow that?
Because the crowd was so like into Maiden, and the stage shows they put on were like unbelievable as far as energy and
I can't see
everything.
Gene Simmons agreeing to that. That's kind of odd.
He's a businessman,
I guess.
Yeah,
what the people want, I guess.
Yeah, but I definitely check out that documentary because it goes it goes into everything. They interview almost everybody that had ever been associated with Maiden in any kind of, like Doug Sampson, the previous drummer,
and what Mark was saying earlier too is, and if you get your hands on that really nice. You got to get the box set version of Best of the Beast because it's got the sweet sort of
family tree.
That thing that'll make your head hurt. There's just so many just different variations and people kind of coming in and out of the band. Yeah, especially prior to
that even comes in. They have it split off to where Adrian Smith comes in from Urchin, and they go back to the back history of all that stuff. And it's
and you got Samson doing their thing at this time.
Bruce.
Yeah, Bruce is kind of in the scene, but he's doing something different.
Yeah, which their manager at the time was Rod Smallwood. He didn't want Bruce in the band because he thought he was a douche, basically. What the hell kind of name is Bruce? And at the time in Samson, Bruce Dickinson was wearing almost like this, Roman kind of like garb, and it was just ridiculous and over the top.
The Samson covers are kind of weird S&M-y kind of weird stuff, coupled with like WWF wrestling outfits, He
got him a leather jacket and told him to, that was, what's your real name? What's your surname? Yeah, Dickinson. Okay, that's what you're doing.
That'll work. Yeah. Now, the production on this first Iron Maiden, Harris and those guys weren't terribly, they're not thrilled about how it sounds. This is the only Maiden record, to my knowledge. Were any of the later ones without Martin Birch?
Yeah, well, Martin Birch did everything up until Fear of the Dark.
Okay, so he did the classic
Malone,
era, I guess.
Will Malone produced this, and according to everything I've read, he was basically just sitting there, like, reading and smoking, and how does that take? It's okay. So basically the guys in Maiden produced the record for all intents and purposes. But I really love the raw kind of sound of it.
Yeah, I've never had any problems with it. Now, Mark and I are debating, we haven't decided yet, might play a Soundhouse Tapes version, which the Soundhouse Tapes were the original recordings of some of these songs, correct?
Yeah, their first demos, they went into to record those, and they're recording on 2-inch tape, so they probably would have sounded good, but all they had was like basically their version, their little cassette tape, and they went in a couple weeks later to try to pay for the actual 2-inch tape to own.
Somebody had taped over.
It had already been taped over, so this stuff I think is a little more punchy because it's just on that little that cassette tape, but that's kind of like the holy grail of Iron Maiden stuff, which it was reissued, I think, in the mid-90s on CD, but it hasn't been since, except on the Best of the Beast. They have 2 tracks.
Get a couple, and that's where it's funny because I was telling Mark that I for a long time got used to the Soundhouse tape version of Iron Maiden, and so then when I finally bought this record, I kind of was like, what's wrong with this song? And I didn't really realize at the time.
Yeah, the version you've got is the remaster that's remastered even different from like the Castle versions that I've got from the 90s.
Yeah, these were the ones that were remastered in the late 90s, I do believe. So, and it's the raw power remasters that came, with special multimedia, videos and stuff, which in 98 was probably like awesome, but now it's like with YouTube and everything,
Well, it's kind of sucks that you have to pop in a CD-ROM to be able to listen to the extra tracks and stuff too, so.
But, oh well.
And all the old Castle versions have like, women in uniform, all the singles are put on the second
The
disc,
really cool bonus tracks.
Nice.
Yeah, bonus tracks.
Which that was their first video, women in uniform.
Oh, was it? And we're gonna get to some more songs from this first record. We're gonna start with Prowler, which was their first single, correct?
Yep, and an opener to the record. Yeah,
and Prowler, has like, it's definitely, to me, I hear this sort of speedier, sort of Thin Lizzy kind of.
It's a pretty straightforward song.
Yeah. You can hear the Wishbone Ash isms, and I even pull out another guy, Irish guy by the name of Rory Gallagher, who was in a band called Taste, and the guy that you heard last week talking with Mark and I on the MC5 show, he turned both Mark and I on to Rory Gallagher stuff, and
I think Di'Anno, he brings more of that kind of approach than like the Halfords or the more falsetto vocal heavy metal, or even like the approach Ozzy had.
Sure. And I think the other thing we should say that I was pointing out to Mark before we started was, I feel like the way Harris writes songs, and you'll hear it. I don't know. You'll hear it a little bit in Remember Tomorrow, which is a song after Prowler, is he has almost like a classical music sort of style that he's sort of making. And you said that Harris really wanted Maiden to be like almost a prog rock band, but it was like the other guys were sort of challenging him to not be that. And so that's kind of that cool dynamic that always existed.
Yeah, it was the weird thing is that he somehow channeled prog rock into what Maiden ended up being. And in all intents and purposes, Maiden is real proggy, but it's not the real noodly, like overly like yes kind of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, it always has its roots in like heavy metal, and whereas like Dream Theater gets a little like too out there and stuff, and and some of these bands, even like Rime of the Ancient Mariner, as prog as a song like that will become. There's something that makes it different.
There's the gallop. There's always this force kind of like pushing it forward. Yeah. I think that a lot of those other bands are lacking.
I mean, I guess it's as proggy as Metallica gets on Injustice for All. I mean, if you consider that prog rock, then I guess maybe
prog just has I think it just has bad connotations. Yeah. The word does,
because I think like anything, there's good prog and there's bad prog. Yeah, I mean, it just doesn't matter. So we're gonna hear Prowler, and then Remember Tomorrow, Transylvania, and Sanctuary. What besides Prowler, I mean, what made you choose these three songs? I guess
Remember Tomorrow is kind of like one of their, just to show the variation of the record. If people don't have this record, I would hope everybody does, but if not, no. But Remember Tomorrow is kind of like it's a ballad, but it's a ballad through the eyes of Maiden, which has never been syrupy, sweet, romantic ballads by any means. But it shows like the more delicate, I think, side of their songwriting.
And I hear things like I was pointing out to you, things like that you heard on Sin After Sin and Sad Wings of Destiny, Priest, like Dreamer Deceiver, and what's the other tune that
Beyond the Realms of Death?
Beyond the Realms of Death. That has that same sort of like still dark, morbid, kind of sad ballad to it. It's not like a happy, sappy love ballad.
Yeah, more like operatic, like lost lover kind of thing. But usually that never makes it into any of the lyrics.
Yeah, and those classical melodies sort of build through it. Even though it's super melodic, it's still pretty heavy. And then Transylvania is one of their instrumentals,
which Steve Harris wrote as he was walking home drunk from a bar, and he had to run home so he could remember the lines because he was playing them back and forth.
Oh, that's funny. That's funny. And this to me is like very even though Iron Maiden has like punk elements to it, especially like with Running Free and some of the attitude of Di'Anno and stuff, this is clearly a very anti-punk thing to do. I mean, to write an instrumental. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like, just to show off in a way.
But it's just as punchy, and it's probably one of the faster songs on the record.
It's some of the like the
Clive Burr's probably best like drumming I've been thinking.
Well, this and Genghis Khan are the two instrumentals we're going to be playing on the show, and they're probably his best kind of.
And I think they play Transylvania occasionally live, but I don't remember the last time they have.
Yeah, and I'm remiss in that I've never seen Iron Maiden live. I've had a couple of chances, and
I've even seen with Blaze Bayley once. Yeah, and they were good then too.
Well, I'm sure because one guy can't bring the whole band down.
Yeah, and Brave New World tour, but I haven't seen them since, which is kind of a bummer.
Yeah, we'll go next time. Mark and I are going. So cool. All right,
then we're gonna sleaze it out with Sanctuary.
Oh yeah, and we'll talk more about Sanctuary when we come back. So enjoy Prowler, Remember Tomorrow, Transylvania, and Sanctuary.
Walking through the city, looking, I'm so pretty. I just got to find my way.
that was Sanctuary, Transylvania, Remember Tomorrow, and Prowler. And Sanctuary has just a nice dirty rock vibe to it, you know, almost like coming out of like the garage rock era or something like that.
Yeah, it's a super simple riff, but it makes you want to like get up and start running around.
Sure.
It has the same kind of vibe as like Wicker Man, you know, what they later on do on Brave New World. It's got that kind of like sleazy, kind of like hard rock biker kind of vibe to it.
Yeah, I hear like a lot of Hellbent for Leather, you know.
Yeah.
That kind of, you know, straightforward approach that Priest was sort of like perfecting right around the era that this record came out, you know. Plus, Judas Priest stole the cop siren idea on Breaking the Law. So, kind of cool. But we're going to kind of wrap things up with the debut record coming up here. And in a way, I guess, for me, outside of maybe Remember Tomorrow, which is, I think, one of the great kind of ballads that Iron Maiden ever wrote, and I have a fond memory of it as well, because one of the first albums I had to review for Eclipse when I first started writing was A Call to Arms, where Opeth does the cover of Remember Tomorrow, which is, we did play actually when we did those two-part podcasts.
Oh, that's right,
Opeth,
yeah.
So, with Chris. But these are kind of probably the two most famous tracks on the record in a way, Phantom of the Opera and the title track Iron Maiden. At least they're the two most forward thinking in a way. I mean, this really informs you where the band's going to go in terms of like defining heavy metal in the early 80s.
Well, yeah, and I mean, I think a unique part of Phantom of the Opera was that even if there's no vocals, if you took the vocal track off, you could still hear the lyrics basically through the guitar and the bass lines. It's all written right out there, and it's all in unison almost.
And this is probably the proggiest that Harris got on probably these first two records in general. Yeah, I would say
it's kind of the precursor to Rime of the Ancient Mariner, really.
Yeah, for sure. And you hear the precursor of really the sort of the ultimate Metallica thrash riff. Yeah, is deeply embedded in the song.
Oh, totally.
I think if you took this song and probably like Am I Evil, Diamond Head, and you kind of put those two together, you really get where Metallica's kind of coming from, especially in, with Seek and Destroy and some of the Kill 'Em All type stuff.
Well, back when Cliff Burton was in the band, you could hear the bass.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, no doubt. So, and this is definitely one of my favorite tracks, and one I'm sure most of you are intimately familiar with. I mean, there's probably not many people that have.
It's usually in their repertoire, no matter when they play. Or I mean, if I own like 4 or 5 live records and signed a couple of those at least.
It's on most of them, yeah. And that a song that they almost always have to play.
Usually the show closer.
Yeah, very few bands have a great namesake song, and they do. I mean, Asphyx has one. Yeah. Trying to think.
Oh, there's a ton, but. Oh shit!
None that hold up like this song though.
There's a show we just did that another band had.
There's Metal Storm, Face the Slayer from Show No Mercy. Yeah. I mean, there's a few.
I'm sure
if we think of some, we will.
Other ones, but
we're gonna play the Soundhouse version of this, the original kind of recording of Iron Maiden, and
with no backing vocals.
Yeah, very punchy. I mean, that's all you can say about this song. It's very in your face. I don't know. To me, it's like this and Distant Aggressor were like from Priest right around this time. Were like right there, in terms of just super punchy, super like right in your face, Exciter, things like that. I mean, there weren't too many songs that were like, ready
if I would have heard those
free,
as a kid, I would have it would have blown my mind.
Oh yeah, in the late 70s, early 80s, I mean, there was nothing like it, until like Accept comes out with like Fast as a Shark, and some of that where it starts getting a lot more, speedier. And then we're going to sort of gravitate onto the second record, which is the first Martin Birch production, and features, in my mind, maybe the most iconic Maiden cover. I mean, I think this was the T-shirt of the Iron Maiden era,
of Killers, yeah.
Probably this and Number of the Beast, and I mean, I don't know. I mean, they're all so iconic. I mean, Powerslave.
Powerslave is the ones I saw. Mug, I saw the most of. I think growing up was everybody. Their Powerslave stuff everywhere.
Yeah, and that was the biggest tour they ever did, so that would make sense. But I guess like Killers is just so simple. There's not like Powerslave and Somewhere in Time and some of that. That's where like Derek Riggs is getting so like involved with his artwork. And
Killers is the first one he actually painted specifically for me. The first record, the cover was just something he already had done that they liked.
Gotcha.
And they pulled out, and then Eddie kind of like formed from that original kind of early painting.
And I think that maybe that's why it's so iconic, is because it is the first feeling you get of like the real Eddie.
Yeah.
You know, and
well, I mean,
the acts
and from
the smile, it's all
marketing
right there.
standpoint, like this was a brilliant first move on their part, is to have the band kind of steps back a little bit as far as them being in the spotlight, and it's Eddie who's kind of the face of the band. And I can't think of any other band that's really done it to that.
Not to
extent.
Maiden's level. I mean, Megadeth came close with the.
But Megadeth came out after the fact.
Absolutely.
I saw.
I know what you're saying. So before this.
I mean, Priest had like the Steel Eagle thing, but they didn't really exploit it to the extent that. I mean, Eddie's on every Iron Maiden cover.
Yeah, I can't think of anything like this. Maybe Led Zeppelin with the not necessarily the balloon, but the sort of angel, like winged. Thing that they had but it was never. But
it wasn't a character.
Yeah.
Like Eddie is actually he's almost the. I mean, basically,
he's the mascot.
Yeah, it's like, but every cover is like him going through a progression too. It's not just random.
Sure, and he's representing the theme of the album, which of course Killers is all about the famous killers throughout history. So. Great. Great record. This is, you said that a lot of people slag this record as being not as good as the first, and I guess there is some filler songs on here. Songs that aren't.
The first record, I had a hard time omitting certain songs.
Oh yeah,
and this one I had no problem omitting certain songs.
There's like 5 songs you think of when you think of Killers.
Yeah.
Wrathchild, which we're gonna play first. The title track. Murders in the Rue Morgue, which we cut because a lot of people have heard that and. I don't know. You just got to get to the
taste
point.
Thing. Well, sure. I've heard it a million times too, so I was trying to pull out some other stuff. And we're going to hear Wrathchild, which is probably one of my favorite songs they've ever done.
Sure.
Really. It kind of encapsulates the dangerous vibe off the first record. A little bit of the biker stuff. It's stripped down and simple, but just catchy and anthemic as well.
Yeah, and I wonder how much influence like Motorhead had on them, because it's there sometimes in like the attitude that Di'Anno has a little bit. Like you mentioned, biker vibe to it. But I'm sure everybody was probably influencing each other a little bit.
Yeah, I don't know how many times I know like Angel Witch, they were like contemporaries with Maiden.
Sure.
Just playing these tiny little bar, like the Cart and Horse and all these other tiny little bars that they used to play. Yeah. I'm sure it was. They're aware of each other, but I don't know how much influence was directly there. I
hear a lot of Angel Witch on the title track, Killers. Like that. I hear a ton of Angel Witch kind of stuff there, but I don't. Yeah, I don't know. You're right. It's kind of all intermittently mixed. And then we're going to sort of end with the Genghis Khan, the instrumental we mentioned before, which probably the fastest drumming that Maiden had done thus far, and probably the fastest drumming of anyone outside of Priest and Maiden, or Priest and Motorhead. In terms of speed and velocity. So, but all right, enjoy the epic Phantom of the Opera, Iron Maiden, the Soundhouse Tape version, Wrathchild, and Genghis Khan. Genghis Khan, Wrathchild, the Soundhouse Tape version of Iron Maiden, and then Phantom of the Opera. And we're going to close things out here with a trio of tunes, all very different from each other.
Yeah, we're going to have Prodigal Son, their kind of version of their answer to Remember Tomorrow, kind of for this one, which is, it has elements of like what Opeth would go on to as far as structure.
I heard Porcupine Tree
from
the Stupid Dreams record. Even I hear a lot of Camel, especially in the vocal harmonies and stuff like that. The stuff that like Andy Latimer would do.
Yeah, this is one that Di'Anno's really kind of stretching his voice as well. I mean, it's his probably most like beautiful.
And we should say for those people that don't know the story, I mean, ultimately what sort of happened with Di'Anno is that he was kind of cracking on tour a little bit. He couldn't handle like he was getting really withdrawn,
and I guess he had a little bit of some cocaine and alcohol issues too. But the whole thing was more him being withdrawn.
Yeah,
and this is like when they were getting huge. Like they were touring all over the place and just becoming huge, and that's when it's based on the drummer's name.
Nico McBrain.
Oh no, Clive Burr. And the next record, he starts kind of doing the same thing. It's like you used to playing these tiny little gigs, and then it starts exploding to like you're playing arenas and stuff. Yeah. And Di'Anno just wasn't up to it. And even to this day, Di'Anno says that he's the ultimate, which it's kind of hard to argue with that. Yeah. but he said he has no qualms of ever quitting the band.
Yeah, I mean, he knew that he probably couldn't have gone to the next level.
Yeah.
And Dickinson was the guy that was gonna take him to that next phase and stuff. So there's no big dramatic story of fist fights or anything like that. It was just a certain essentially they knew they had to go in a different direction.
And Steve Harris is a pretty straight guy. He'll come right out and like, this isn't working. Like he gave both of the drummer and Di'Anno, like, okay, here's a couple months, we're going to take some time off. If you figure things out, if you want to come back, cool. If not, we need to move on, because this is he's single focused Iron Maiden.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, he kind of lives his whole life around Iron Maiden.
He's the equivalent like Peter with Vader.
Yeah, or Morgan from Marduk and stuff. So, but Prodigal Son, very cool tune. And then we're going to go into Purgatory,
which has a great angular opening riff to it.
Yeah,
it's just, and that's this. I mean, these first two records, we kind of see like the genesis of some of the go-to Iron Maiden riffs, and there'll be different variations on each one. But the approach to those kind of songs, I think we see the genesis on these two records.
Sure, and then we're gonna end with my favorite. This is my favorite Di'Anno song, and I don't know what the element of it that I love so much, but it's the title track, Killers, and for some reason I just sort of fell in love with this song. And it to me,
Killer Behind You.
Yeah, Killer Behind You. It's very catchy sing-along. There's a sort of a build within it. There's a imminence to it. I don't know. It's like Phantom of the Opera when you take some of the prog elements out. It flows a little bit better, I guess, or something. But it has that same sort of
a little herky-jerky,
so very very cool. And it also has, I noticed, the quintessential Queensryche riff as well. it's sort of built in there, but anyways, we hope we hopefully gave you a different spin. Maybe you don't know some of the history of Di'Anno or aren't as familiar with these records.
Or if you were turned off. And I mean, I know that was the case for me at first, as I was like, man, this isn't Dickinson. What's going on in this? But
and so many people are used to that. We'll be doing our Blaze Bailey show down the road. Just kidding. Just joking.
There were some good songs then, but not vocal performances.
Yeah. So, but anyways, let us know what you thought. Shoot us an email at requiempodcast@gmail.com. Check us out on iTunes. Leave us a comment. Go to the website. There's
requiempodcast.com. Yeah, we've got merchandise. There's metal card sets. There's something else I want to try to start out here is, in these troubled times, people can't necessarily donate money to the show. But what I'd like to propose is, if you have extra CDs, if you have CDs that you just, you're ripping them and you don't want to have anymore, we're going to start the Requiem library.
Ooh.
So we'll look for the site, and we'll have some information where you can help us out there.
And we're also approaching episode 89, where we're going to start our top 12 greatest years of heavy metal history. So send us some of your feedback. A couple people have already given us some messages. We got a shout out for 1990 and a couple other years. So let us know. So anyways, enjoy Prodigal Son, Purgatory, and Killers. For Requiem Metal Podcast, I'm Jason.
And I'm Mark.